He might not have any money. That's what I thought. But I can't just turn him away now. I'll feed him and send him on his way. With that in mind, I stood beside the old man. The old man closed the menu and hesitantly pulled a plastic bag from his pocket. It started to rain. The autumn sky was already pitch dark. Another day was coming to an end. My cafe opens at 8 a.m. for breakfast, and I close it at 7 p.m. when the office workers head home. I'm Jason, 45 years old. I run a cafe called Pegasus, which has been in my family since my grandfather's time. I live with my wife, Sarah, who is 4 years younger, and our two kids, Sam, who's 10, and Holly, who just started school this year. This cafe, which my grandfather opened, was established 70 years ago in a corner of downtown Tokyo, the same year my now deceased father was born. My dad was born in the year of the horse, and that's how the cafe got its name. When my grandfather opened the shop, it was bustling with people enjoying Western food and parfaits. By the time my dad took over, it was seen as a bit old-fashioned, but it became a favorite spot for the regulars. Recently, with the rise of a retro show era boom, we've been getting more young customers, and it's been pretty interesting to see. Old or new, there are always people who appreciate what we offer, and that's how we stay in business. Thanks to my grandfather establishing the shop early, I don't have to pay any rent. The whole building is an inheritance from my parents. Even though it's downtown, I wouldn't be able to run such a relaxed business if I had to pay rent in the heart of the city. Still, even though my father rebuilt it, the four-story building doesn't have an elevator. The first floor is the cafe and a tenant space. The second floor used to be a rental office, but it's now used for storage. My mother lives on the third floor, and my family lives on the fourth. Not having rent or mortgage to worry about is great, but thinking about the future, I'd like to rebuild it with an elevator. Whether my son takes over the cafe is up to him, but I'd like to make it new while I'm still running it. Back in my grandfather and father's time, the cafe stayed open late into the night. I also used to stay open until 10 p.m., but now with so many restaurants around, there's less need for it. Since we're in an office district, most of our customers come in during the day on weekdays. That's why I focus on breakfast and lunch from Monday to Friday, and we also offer takeout. With the kids still young, if I work late, I barely get to see them. When my youngest was born 3 years ago, I started taking weekends off. The key is how much I can earn during the weekdays. Today is Friday. Tomorrow the kids are off from school, so they can relax a bit. That's why I make dinner for them at the cafe every Friday night. It's a kids' meal, which they love. After dropping them off at school in the morning, Sarah helps me out in the cafe, so she gets a little break too. She's not just my work partner, she's my life partner. We met when she was working at a nearby company and became a regular customer here, and that's how we ended up getting married. You could say this cafe helped build the foundation for my family and financial life. Sarah called for the kids, and they came down from our home upstairs. They took their usual spot at the table in the far back, waiting for their kids' meals. Holly is a light eater, but Sam needs bigger portions now to satisfy his appetite. Sarah and I finished off whatever leftovers were around. Even that is a special event for the kids. When Sarah brought them into the cafe, she walked over to the counter instead of going to the table. "Hey, there's an old man standing in front of the cafe." "What?" When I glanced out the window after hearing that, I saw an old man with disheveled white hair holding an umbrella, staring in our direction. He was wearing a checkered shirt, a jumper, and what looked like a pair of dirty gray pants. He gave off the vibe of someone who had just wandered out aimlessly. He kept walking past the cafe slowly, hesitating as he glanced over, then stopping to look again, and repeating the cycle. Should I go ask him something? Like what? Ask him if he needs something from our cafe. If not, we'll have to ask him to leave. Even though it's close to closing, having someone loitering doesn't look good. I wanted to close the shop, but he wasn't coming in or leaving. It was starting to irritate me. Wait, I'll go talk to him. What? That's dangerous. It's fine. He was a frail old man. He probably wouldn't try anything, but I kept a watchful eye on Sarah from behind the counter, who seemed completely unbothered. Excuse me, would you like to come in? Are you waiting for someone? The old man looked startled at first, but after lowering his gaze and thinking for a moment, he said, "Well, if you insist," and came inside. Welcome. I quickly switched to my customer service voice. Since the counter seats were too high, Sarah guided him to a nearby table. Dad, where's our dinner? I heard the kids calling from the back. Jason, can you get the kids' meals ready? I'll take the order. She stepped outside again to hang the closed sign, then came back to take the old man's order. While plating the kids' meals, I kept an eye on what was happening. What would you like? The old man sighed and said, "The coffee smells wonderful. At my cafe, we brew our coffee with a siphon." Even though the shop has been renovated multiple times over the past 70 years, and the furniture and wallpaper have changed often, the rich aroma of coffee has remained constant. He might not have any money. That's what I thought. But turning him away now wasn't an option, and I didn't want to give him a free meal only to have him come back every day. That would be a problem too. I should have just left him alone outside. Honestly, that's how I felt. I heard Sarah asking him in her usual polite manner if he liked Western food. I decided to just feed him and send him on his way. With that thought, I stepped out from behind the counter, telling Sarah to serve the kids, and stood next to the old man. After Sarah glanced over at me and left the area, the old man hesitantly closed the menu and began speaking. He pulled a plastic bag out of his pocket. Sorry, but could you put the spaghetti in this for me? I'd like to take it home. His bony, frail hand clutched the flimsy disposable plastic bag. I hesitated for a moment, but then agreed and asked if Napolitan spaghetti would be okay. Yes, the one with the red ketchup, he replied. I nodded and went back behind the counter. Sarah, noticing the situation, brought over some coffee. You might have to wait a bit, so please have this in the meantime. It's getting a little chilly out, isn't it? I wondered if the old man would even want coffee on a night like this, but his response surprised me. Yes? Could I take this coffee home as well? My wife is waiting for me. Ah, I see. All right, no problem. I packed the Napolitan spaghetti, while Sarah prepared the coffee in takeout containers. Back in my father's time, we used to deliver within the neighborhood. To avoid the hassle of picking up dishes later, I switched to disposable containers and stopped doing deliveries, offering takeout instead. I handed him the 2 coffees and spaghetti, all packed so he could easily carry them home. Now you can take things home like this, huh? I didn't know what to do, so I brought this empty bottle with me. Ah, that's what it was. I finally understood why the old man had been holding that bottle. I had thought he might be asking for water or something. The old man looked pleased as he gazed at the bag. Many of our customers take their coffee to go during lunch since their breaks are short. That's why we're set up for it. That's really helpful. I can manage everyday meals, but I've never made Western food. It's my wife's birthday today. She said she wanted to have the spaghetti and coffee from here. We planned to come together, but the rain started. She's in a wheelchair, and it's hard to take her out. I really appreciate this." Hearing this, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, and suddenly I was embarrassed by my earlier assumptions. Is it her birthday? Wow, happy birthday! This is some bread we baked today. Please take it with you. With that, Sarah quickly packed the complimentary item into the bag. Thank you for everything. The old man bowed deeply and pulled a folded $100 bill from his pocket. I told him, no need to pay. What? It's a birthday gift. And please, feel free to bring your wife anytime. I'll personally help you both inside, so don't worry. I said it almost on impulse. I regretted having judged him so quickly, assuming he was a homeless man without money. He bowed deeply again and left. Maybe they're both elderly, taking care of each other. Sarah commented. The kids had already finished eating and gone back upstairs, leaving just the two of us at the table. What was that about? I was happy when you said it was for her birthday, but I was surprised you didn't charge him. Well, at first, I was annoyed, thinking he was just a troublesome customer before closing. I even thought we'd never have a wheelchair customer. It made me realize how far I still have to go. Women seem to manage better living alone when they get older, but when an old man has to take care of everything, it just feels sad. There's something heartbreaking about it. We talk about gender equality, but still. Sarah's father lives alone. Her sister and brother-in-law live nearby, but when Sarah visits, she says the house is a mess unrecognizable compared to how neat and organized her father used to be. More than the shock of the change, it makes her feel sad. Well, at least you can cook and clean, so we don't have to worry about that. Are we already talking about old age? Well, I am younger than you, and women live longer, so I guess I'm safe. We laughed together, but that old man probably never imagined he'd end up caring for his wife when he was younger. Just like us now, he likely never thought about growing old or losing his health. I should have removed that step in front of the cafe. As I washed the dishes, I looked out toward the front of the shop and thought about it again. When I had inherited and renovated the cafe from my father, I considered getting rid of the step at the entrance. But I decided against it, worried that dust from the street would blow in, and since I had never seen any wheelchair users, I left it as it was. The thin, veiny hand that had accepted the bag with the spaghetti. Even if he had pushed his wife in the wheelchair, they would have hesitated at that 5-centimeter step in front of the shop. Thinking back on the renovation and my cold attitude toward the old man earlier, a heavy sense of regret weighed on my chest. I opened the shop in the morning and served breakfast. We get many takeout customers, and there are regulars who come in every morning and sit at the same table at the same time. By the time Sarah arrives, after dropping the kids off at school and finishing her morning chores, I'm already busy preparing lunch. It's not until after 2 p.m. that I can finally take a break. At that time, we often get salesmen stopping by for a rest or local housewives gathering for tea. And on one such Monday afternoon, that old man returned. This time, the old man came with his wife in a wheelchair. We've taken you up on your kind offer and decided to come. Please, come on in. I stepped outside. The petite, sweet-looking woman was seated in the wheelchair. In front of the shop, there was the newly bought ramp. Why hadn't I thought of it sooner? With that thought, I had hurriedly purchased and set it up. It was my way of atoning for the past oversight. Please, come inside. The elderly woman beamed at me. These are from the garden. With that, she handed over a bouquet of roses wrapped in newspaper. Wow, such a beautiful color. Sarah smiled as she held the deep pink roses. Autumn roses have a stronger color and scent. Since you treated me to such delicious coffee and spaghetti, I wanted to give you a little something in return. I moved the chair by the window to make room for her wheelchair. Would the same thing as last time be okay today? She asked shyly. My husband said he wanted to try making it, but I told him there's no way it would taste the same, so he suggested we come here instead. 2 Napolitan spaghetti? And I'll have coffee, and my wife would like a cream soda, the green one, please. After the meal. Sure, I'll get that right away. Watching the elderly couple chat together made both Sarah and me feel a sense of warmth and happiness. We learned that the husband, Terence, was 82, and his wife, Yvonne, was 80. Last year, Yvonne had suffered a minor stroke, which affected her ability to walk. While she had undergone rehabilitation at a care facility, her body lacked the strength to recover fully, so she returned home, using a wheelchair when outside. Our children made the house accessible for us, so we've been able to live together. But since they've all moved away for work or marriage, we decided we'd manage on our own. We thought about moving to a care facility, but we'd have to live in a new place where we don't know anyone. We figured as long as we can live together, we'll stay as we are. Thanks to that, we can still enjoy lovely moments like having a meal at a cafe at our age. Look at this soda, I love this color. Just looking at it makes me happy. Yvonne's smile, as she laughed in front of the green glass, looked truly happy. We've stayed in this town, but many of our friends have moved in with their kids or gone to care facilities. It feels like everyone around us is disappearing. It's lonely when your friends are gone. We worked hard, earned money, bought a house. But now our children don't need it. They've bought their own places. At this point, as long as they're healthy, that's all that matters. Yes, all we can do now is make sure we're not a burden on them. We're not going to be of much use to anyone anymore. So we just try to stay out of the way. Sarah and I watched the close-knit elderly couple. It felt as if we were being shown an example by these life veterans. At the same time, hearing them speak as though they felt out of place, despite being the generation that built the foundation for our lives, was painful. Would we feel the same way when we grow old, wondering if our children will think the same of us? Oh, Terence and Yvonne. I know them. My mother said after hearing our conversation. I used to take paper cutting classes with Yvonne. She's such a small, lovely woman. They mentioned not wanting to be a burden on their children. Well, of course. I feel the same way. If I ever become unable to take care of myself, just imagine how much more work that would mean for Sarah. I'd have to go to a care facility. Getting old seems so sad. It is, but that's life. In the past, it was common for children to stay near their parents and take care of them, but now people have more freedom. We have care facilities and more support than we used to. The most important thing is health. When we built this building, I thought living on the 3rd floor without an elevator would be difficult when I got older, but here I am at 70, still managing. Daily exercise is so important, my mother said with a laugh. Although we live close by, my mother has been living alone since my father passed away. One of her favorite pastimes is baking bread. She bakes at her own pace, about once a week, and gives the bread to customers at the cafe. Some customers suggest she should sell the bread, but she says that would take the fun out of it. I can do it because I don't charge for it. If people started complaining about the price or taste, I'd lose all motivation. It's fun because it's just a hobby. In line with my mother's wishes, We offer her baked goods under the name Grandma's Lucky Service at Pegasus. It's not always available, and just because we didn't have it yesterday doesn't mean we'll have it today. I'm grateful for the customers who enjoy the randomness of it. On the day she bakes, my mother wraps the bread herself and hands it out with a smile at the counter. Those little interactions with people seem to be what motivates her to bake the next batch. As long as you have food to eat and a warm place to stay, that's happiness. But having someone to talk to makes it even more enjoyable. People can live alone, but the joy you create yourself is different from the joy someone else gives you. And if that joy can be shared with someone else, even something as small as a loaf of bread, it becomes a purpose. These days, young people can see each other's faces on their phones or have meetings without even going to the office, right? That's wonderful. But the joy of connecting face to face is something else. Maybe I feel this way because I've lived through a time without phones or computers. I think I understand what my mother is saying. Selling takeout coffee is good for business, but there's a special joy in watching customers savor the taste and aroma at the counter. When you focus on sales and efficient business, you lose sight of that. That's one of my bad habits. I forget that making customers happy is the purpose of this cafe, and I end up prioritizing my own profits. That attitude shows in how I treat customers. I need to remember that my own joy comes from having customers in the first place. Meeting Terrence and Yvonne reminded me of that. Hey, do you know how to play Go? One day, out of the blue, Sarah asked me. Go? You mean that board game with the black and white stones, like chess? That doesn't sound like you know how to play. What, you want to learn? Sam's friend was bragging about it at school. He said he's learning it in after-school care. Apparently, it's popular now. It helps develop concentration, creativity, and imagination. I've heard about it too, but I don't really know much about it. When Sam started school, we tried to enroll him in after-school care, but he didn't get in due to the lottery. Even though we both work, running a family business from home put us at a disadvantage. So we sent him to a self-study program instead, but 6 months in, he still wasn't very motivated. I wanted to spark his interest in learning before his studies got too difficult, but to be honest, I wasn't exactly the studious type myself. So I couldn't expect too much. There are other kids waiting for after-school care too. Everyone ends up going to some kind of tutoring, but even if both parents work to make money, you still have to pay for the lessons. And if you have more than one kid, the cost doubles. No wonder the birth rate is dropping. Parents have to work, but there's nowhere for the kids to go. As I thought about parents working to cover school fees and secure their children's futures, only to end up like Terrence and Yvonne, an elderly couple left behind, it made me feel conflicted, stuck between two generations. A few days later, my mother arranged to meet Yvonne at the cafe. I invited her to do some knitting with me. Is it okay if we stay a while? You can't make it up to the third floor. It's fine, we'll do it here. Well, I'll be off then, Terrence said, getting ready to leave without even staying for tea. Aren't you going to have coffee today? I can't do knitting, so I'll let the ladies enjoy themselves. Then, an idea struck me. Do you know how to play Go, by any chance? Oh, my husband plays it on the computer every day, Yvonne chimed in. Sarah and I exchanged excited glances and gave each other a silent cheer. And so, Sam's Go lessons began. It turned out that Terrence had been a schoolteacher. He joked that he never made it to principal, but that didn't matter. What was impressive was that he had stood in front of a classroom and taught. Twice a week, for 30 minutes, Terrence would give Sam Go lessons during his and Yvonne's afternoon walks. Sam isn't the type to sit still and focus, so it might be a challenge. That's no problem. You can't push kids too much. If you try to drill knowledge into them, they get tired and lose interest. The key is to spark their curiosity and think things through with them, helping them search for the right answers. That way, they won't lose motivation. Sam wasn't quick to pick things up, but Terrence's patient, engaging teaching style kept him focused. Soon, Sam even started bringing along his friends, other kids who couldn't get into after-school care, to learn Go together. Just as Sarah had predicted, their 30-minute sessions started stretching to an hour as they became engrossed in the game, forgetting all about their phones. In return, I offered tea and meals as a token of thanks for the lessons. At first, Terrence refused, saying he wasn't doing it for the money, but that made it even harder to offer cash in exchange. I often gave Terrence and Yvonne some of my mother's bread to take home as a small gift, especially since all I served was Western-style food. Jason, the tenant space next door is vacant, right? Do you think I could use a bit of that space? My mother made this request as autumn deepened. Our cafe used to be larger, but my father downsized it, converting half of it into a rental space. It had been a flower shop, then a diner, and now it sat empty, neglected in this stagnant economy. In this sluggish economy, it's rare for anyone to start a new business in the city center. I had even given up on looking for a tenant. What do you want to do with it? I want to teach knitting. To whom? Whoever wants to learn. I'll just sit there knitting, and if anyone wants to join, they're welcome to. It's not about making money from teaching. It's about having a space for people to come together. If someone wants to learn, I'll teach them. Yvonne is quite skilled too. I remembered my childhood. My mother used to take knitting lessons. She even used a machine that made a loud whirring noise as it worked. She'd move the handle, like that of an iron, back and forth, and it would automatically knit. The sweaters she made were worn by me, my brother, and my late father, and when they became too small, she'd unravel them to make blankets or shawls, whatever was needed. Are you thinking of using that machine again? If someone wants to learn, I'll show them, but I doubt many people have machines like that anymore. I could just display it as a conversation piece. If anyone is interested, I'll teach them how to use it. Yvonne and I, along with some other friends, could display our work and teach people who want to make the same things, or even gift some of our work to people who want it. I need a space to display my pieces too, so I'd like to use the tenant space next door. Yvonne and I were reminiscing about how we used to be so absorbed in knitting, but now nobody seems to care. Ready-made items are cheap. And I understand that, but I'd love to teach anyone who's interested in learning our skills. And even if nobody comes to learn, we'd love to use it as a space for us grandmothers to enjoy our hobbies. That's a great idea, Mom. Let's do it. It'll be great for keeping elderly people from being stuck at home alone. Sarah suddenly got enthusiastic about the idea. Even though we weren't charging rent, if it was going to be in public view, we needed to make sure it was done properly. My mother offered to cover all the renovation costs. In exchange, I agreed to provide tea for free. I'm over 70 now, and it's time to wrap things up in life. I want to spend my remaining years with people I enjoy. For those who don't have a place to go, I want to provide that space. And for those who are isolated, I want to offer opportunities to connect. It won't make any money, but I want to live the rest of my life with purpose. My mother had spent years caring for my grandmother as a daughter-in-law. And the last year of my father's life was spent shuttling between the hospital and home to care for him. She also helped take care of my kids when our cafe kept us too busy to manage on our own. After dedicating her life to the family, she now wanted to pursue something for herself. I wanted to support her as much as I could. She designed the space with a European-style interior, like something out of a romantic manga. She said it was inspired by and of Green Gables. It made me realize that my mother had once had her own girlish dreams. The back of the room had heated floors, where people could sit, and a large wooden table was placed near the entrance. We didn't advertise, but gradually one or two people began showing interest. "Mom, let's do talent sharing." "What's that?" "Everyone has different skills, right? Let's offer those skills to others. Like knitting, sewing, whatever your friends are good at. They can gather, teach, and learn from each other. Some days, they can just gather for tea or even have a potluck. Your salon can be a place for that. Hey, don't just invite a bunch of people without thinking it through. It could get out of hand. Even if things started off well, it would be disheartening if problems arose later, leading to the project being shut down. And if rumors started spreading, it could affect our business, which made me nervous. But Sarah had already spoken to my mother and convinced her to start with a winter program to support children during their winter break. What's that? We'll help kids during their winter vacation. They can study at home, but Sam's school requires them to submit some sort of creative project, like artwork or crafts. It's a real headache for all the moms. Kids these days are good at studying but not so good at creating things on their own. We'll help with that. Are you going to watch kids of all ages? Isn't that going to be a lot of work? We've set a schedule for different programs on different days, with a maximum of 5 kids per session. And what are you going to teach them? Monday is calligraphy, Tuesday is embroidery, Wednesday is Go, and Thursday is knitting. Just 4 days. Terrence is a calligrapher, and his writing is amazing. Even adults would want to learn from him. Yvonne will teach how to knit scarves. She's prepared plenty of yarn. Once the kids learn the basic techniques, they can continue on their own, and Yvonne just needs to guide them at the start and finish. Your mom will teach embroidery, cross-stitch, which is perfect for elementary school kids. It'll be like an alternative to after-school care. And it'll be helpful for both the kids and parents, while also giving the grandmothers something fun to do. And you'll handle the meals. Ha! You'll be serving lunch. A lunch plate for $5. Don't worry, I'll find sponsors to cover the costs of drinks and snacks, so it'll be fine. I didn't quite understand what Sarah meant. What I did realize, though, was that she was surprisingly proactive. Maybe it was a remnant of her time working in product planning, but while I was busy running the cafe alone, the space next door had become incredibly lively. Sam became obsessed with Go and hardly played anything else, even at home. The girls in his class mastered the basics of crochet, creating long chains of yarn and sticking them to construction paper to make various designs. Terrence taught the children the joy of brushwork, and those with potential even began learning calligraphy. Meanwhile, the mothers who brought their children became engrossed in crafts, trying their hand at shawls or adding embroidery to their children's school supplies. Each found their own way to enjoy themselves. Some mothers would bring their babies on their backs, leave them with the grandmothers, and enjoy a moment of peace with a cup of tea. Just that simple act provided healing, some said. Eventually, these same people started taking out food from my cafe or meeting their husbands there for dinner on their way home from work. For the adults, I introduced a special lunch plate, which became a hit and turned into one of our signature menu items. It turns out that, like kids, adults enjoy having a variety of dishes neatly arranged on one plate. One day, officials from the local government office visited the café. They specialized in support for children and the elderly. At first, I thought they had come to raise concerns about our unlicensed, unplanned gatherings, but it was the opposite. They asked about how these activities came about and interviewed not only my mother and Sarah but also the participants about the sense of fulfillment and connections that had been created. This story was then published in the district's newsletter, and just as Sarah had predicted, sponsors appeared. A local craft shop started providing materials for us. Their reasoning was that if people developed an interest in embroidery and knitting at the grandma's salon, it would help them expand their customer base. Parents were grateful that their children could complete their winter break projects while they worked. And Go tournaments were even organized with the kids from the after-school program. The salon also began receiving grants, which helped cover food costs, and I was compensated for providing meals. As time passed and more people got involved, district support increased. And the program expanded into a multi-generational classroom aimed at fostering interactions between the town's elderly and children. I thought I'd never be able to freely meet friends again once I started using a wheelchair, but instead, I've met so many new people and found joy in knitting again. That birthday really changed my life. Every time flowers bloomed in her garden, she'd bring them to the cafe, but today was the last time. Take care. Terence waved from the car window. His hand, still thin and veined, hadn't changed since those early days. Please, take care of your health. From now on, I can leave everything to others. It's quite freeing. 5 years had passed since that birthday. Terence and Yvonne were moving into a retirement home with nursing care and were leaving the neighborhood. It had become harder for Terence to care for Yvonne, so their children had found a facility for them. We thought it'd be best to move in while we're both still healthy. It would be much harder if one of us had to go alone, Terence said with a smile, though many people were saddened by their departure. My son Sam, who's entering high school next year, had been trained in Go by Terence and was now skilled enough to reach the first Dan level. Since learning Go, Sam had become more disciplined with his time and more focused on his studies. Before they left, Holly knitted a blanket and gave it to Yvonne as a farewell gift. "You're so skilled, I'm sure you could make something even better than what I've made. It's the fact that someone made it just for me that makes me happy. I knit myself, so I know how much time and effort went into this. And you even chose my favorite green, thank you so much." My mother and Sarah were both in tears. It seems that the older you get, the more painful it becomes to say goodbye to people you've spent so many years with. Don't cry. Come visit us. There's a tea salon at the home too, so everyone can come and see us, Yvonne said with a smile, and we all nodded. The Grandma's Salon, which had started from a simple idea and donated talents, had grown into a major project with district support. Now it was hosted at a community center where elderly people gathered to enjoy their hobbies together. The former salon next to our cafe had been turned into a shop selling their handmade products, and district staff came by daily to run it. In spring and autumn, regular exhibitions and bazaars were held, with proceeds going to the after-school programs. The number of after-school facilities had also increased, and the elderly volunteers who taught the children were enjoying their busy and fulfilling lives. Thank you so much. I had such a wonderful time every day, and I've enjoyed so many delicious meals, Yvonne said, squeezing my hand. But really, I was the one who should have been thanking them. Their presence had kept me from getting lost in a profit-driven mindset and reminded me of the joy of making customers happy. Thanks to the grandma's salon, family conversations had increased, we'd made more connections with the local community, and our sales had grown as a result. Thank you both for everything. Terrence and Yvonne left the town, driven away in their daughter and son-in-law's car. As I watched them go, I found myself wondering how many goodbyes my father and grandfather must have experienced while running this cafe for so many years. Yet by staying here, they were also able to enjoy nostalgic reunions and make new connections. Today, I opened the shop once again. The familiar aroma of coffee filled the air. What is this supposed to mean? I was at a loss for words as I stared at the nameplate. Today was my precious sister's wedding day. The nameplate placed in front of me had the unbelievable words "Middle School Graduate Dummy" engraved on it. We're simply giving an honest evaluation. Something inside me was about to snap. At that moment, Emily spoke softly. "Shall we crush them?" I heard her words and slowly nodded. "Yeah. My name is John Smith. I turned 35 this year. Sometimes, I'm surprised when I think about my age. Has it really been that long? Looking back over my 35 years, there's been a lot that's happened. There were good times, of course, but also bad ones. But what I remember most vividly is when I was 16. I still clearly recall that day when our world changed in an instant. I was studying with some friends at the local library. When I got home a little after 4 p.m., the house was eerily quiet. The moment I opened the front door, the usual warmth was gone, and the house was shrouded in silence and darkness. I expected my parents to greet me with their usual hi, but that day was different. As the unease grew, I realized there were no calls from Dad either. Normally, if something were wrong, he'd call immediately. But this time, nothing. My little sister, Kate, had just returned from her team activities, and we waited together for our parents to come home. Then, the news on TV caught our attention. The screen showed footage from an accident site, and the camera zoomed in on the scene. That day, our parents had been involved in a collision with a large truck on the highway. At the hospital, I was met with the painful sight of my injured parents. They were hospitalized and fought hard, continuing their treatment. However, their lives didn't last much longer. Even as I faced the reality of their absence, I still couldn't grasp it. The overwhelming feeling of disbelief was all I could focus on. Afterward, the truck driver, who miraculously survived, continued to deny his fault. We barely received any compensation and were forced into a life of hardship. In that moment, my world changed completely. With my family gone, there was only one thing left for me to protect. It was my sister, Kate. Kate was 6 years younger than me. She had just started 4th grade. After our parents passed away, I suddenly found myself supporting the household and doing all the chores. I was still a 16-year-old kid myself, but I knew I couldn't be a kid anymore. I felt crushed under the weight of responsibility, knowing I had to ensure Kate didn't live a life of hardship. I dropped out of high school and immediately started working. There was no money for school, and above all, I had to support my sister, so I had no choice but to work. I started working at a mid-sized electronics company called Martin Electronics. Martin Electronics was a local company that specialized in design and manufacturing. The work was tough, but I had no choice, so I had to keep us going. I had no time to even think about running away. From that day on, I entered a life where weekends didn't exist. Even so, deep inside, I couldn't help but wonder, why am I the one who has to do all this? Do I have to give up on my own life? Even so, as long as Kate was there, I didn't give up. One day, when she came home from school, she looked a bit down. Kate was in her basketball team at school and absolutely loved basketball. But since our parents passed away, she must have been carrying something heavy inside her as well. When she was about to enter middle school, she had been determined to join the basketball team. "John, I've decided not to join the basketball team." I was surprised when I saw the look on Kate's face as she said that. I knew how much she loved basketball. No matter how tough things got, she always smiled when she was playing basketball. "Why?" I asked, swallowing my words. "Because, seeing you work so hard, I can't help but think, what's the point of me continuing basketball if there's no future for us?" When she said that, I wanted to scream inside. Why was she blaming herself so much? I would never allow her to give up on her dream. That's what I thought. "Kate, don't even think about quitting playing basketball. You still have a future ahead of you. I'll figure it out, so you keep playing. Chase your dream." Luckily, basketball doesn't cost as much as sports like baseball, just the ball and a uniform. I can handle that. So don't worry about anything and keep going. Kate nodded silently, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, John." I worked tirelessly to support her. I couldn't let her quit playing basketball, and at the very least, I wanted to make sure she finished middle and high school. That was my one and only mission. But when Kate was in her third year of middle school, her heart wavered again. I was determined to get her through high school, but one day, she said something shocking. "John, I think I want to start working. I don't even like studying, and going to school just feels pointless." Her words stunned me. Kate had always been a bright student. She balanced both academics and basketball perfectly, but now, she was struggling with the reality in front of her. "You've always been so good at playing basketball and studying. There are so many possibilities ahead of you. You don't have to rush into working now." I desperately tried to convince her. I knew that if she didn't stay in school, her future would close off. "But, if I don't work, how are we going to make ends meet?" Her big eyes filled with tears. Even then, I kept encouraging her. "That's exactly why I want you to study hard and see more of the world. Are you sure it's okay?" "Of course. You can do it, no doubt." After that, Kate decided to go to high school. I felt a wave of relief and continued to support her. As time passed, Kate successfully graduated high school and went on to college with the help of a scholarship. She majored in law, worked tirelessly towards her goal, and eventually passed the bar exam. When I got the news of her success, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Back then, all I could do was support her, but now she was confidently forging her own path. "John, I got a job. I'm officially a lawyer." When I heard those words over the phone, I was speechless. The pride I felt for my one and only sister was indescribable. The little girl Kate used to be is now 29 years old. Just the other day, she told me something exciting. "I've met someone really special." The special person Kate had met was Kyle Turner. Kyle was a client at the law firm where Kate worked and the son of Miles Turner, a high-ranking government official. Kate started talking excitedly about meeting Kyle. "He's really an amazing person. He's serious about his work, but he's also incredibly kind. He listens to me and always encourages me." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, and I could see the trust she had in him from her expression. In that moment, a small wave of concern crossed my mind. Was Kyle really the right person for Kate? Would he truly cherish her? I couldn't help but worry. However, Kate had no doubt in her voice. She seemed fully confident in her decision. "John, I've decided. I'm going to marry Kyle." I was momentarily surprised when I heard that. But Kate's resolve was firm. Her eyes were filled with determination, and I could tell she was genuinely happy. "If you're truly happy, I won't say anything. Just make sure he knows to take good care of you." Kate smiled brightly at my words. As the wedding plans moved forward, it became clear that Kate was falling more and more in love with Kyle. The two of them occasionally shared stories about their relationship with me. Kyle was a highly respected bureaucrat, known for his charisma and kind heart. And he often spoke about wanting to contribute to society together with Kate. Still, deep down, I often wondered how our parents would have reacted if they were still alive. If it weren't for that accident, maybe they'd be here to share in this happiness. The thought of that tightened my chest. About 6 months before the wedding, I was supposed to meet Kyle's parents for the first time as Kate's family member. Kate and Kyle were escorted by the staff for a meeting at the wedding venue. During that time, I was left to meet with his parents. In a corner of the hotel lounge, his father Miles and mother Megan were already seated. They came from a distinguished family of high-ranking officials. Feeling a bit nervous, I walked over to them. "Welcome, John." Miles greeted me calmly. However, his expression remained composed, with a sense of distance in it. He was in his early 50s, tall, and had a handsome, distinguished appearance. Dressed in a crisp and elegant suit, he exuded an air of refinement. Seated next to him was Megan. Though past her 50s, she still carried a graceful, sophisticated presence. But there was a cold gleam in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. "Thank you for having me." I bowed slightly and took my seat. For a brief moment, there was silence. Though we exchanged polite greetings, the tension in the air was palpable. After a while, Megan spoke quietly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, John." She smiled, but I sensed something probing behind that smile. "Thank you," I replied politely, though a hint of unease crept into my heart. Miles then spoke up. "Since this is our first time meeting, we'd like to ask you a few things." He looked directly at me as he continued. "Kyle is the pride of our family. He's an exceptional bureaucrat and is striving for an even higher position in the future. Now that Kate has decided to marry him, we're very pleased as well." I felt a small sense of relief at his words. But then, his gaze sharpened as it focused back on me, and he continued. "John, there's something I'd like to ask you first." His piercing eyes locked onto mine. "May I ask about your background?" I took a small breath. "My background?" "Yes, after all, being the brother of such a brilliant lawyer like Kate, I'm sure you have an impressive background as well, don't you?" "Exactly. We'd love to hear what you've done and what achievements you've made." Miles continued with a tone of genuine interest. Choosing my words carefully, I began to speak calmly. "I lost my parents when I was 16. After that, I started working right away to support the household. I dropped out of high school, but I'd been working ever since to protect my family." Miles's expression stiffened for a brief moment. "So, you're saying you only graduated from middle school?" Megan asked coldly. "That's right," I answered quietly. The moment I responded, Megan's expression changed, and she spoke with a firm tone. "A middle school graduate." Her voice dripped with disdain. "With such a background, you have no right to associate with people from our family." Miles nodded silently in agreement. "I'm really concerned this could affect Kyle and Kate's future." I felt a surge of anger rising inside me, but I tried to remain calm. "But I've always been there to protect my sister." "Are you sure you don't mean Kate has protected you?" "What?" Megan sneered as she spoke. "Protect her? You? A middle school graduate?" After a brief silence, I replied firmly. "Of course, Kate earned her accomplishments on her own. But I chose to drop out of high school to help her. No matter what anyone says, I don't regret that decision." Megan couldn't hide her irritation at my response. She exhaled deeply, her cold eyes fixed on me. "If you intend to keep seeing Kyle and Kate," her voice grew lower and colder, "we won't allow you near her." I was speechless. Her words froze the room. There was a clear intention of rejection behind her statement. I felt my anger boiling inside but maintained my composure as I answered. "That won't be possible. Kate is my family. Ever since our parents died, we've supported each other to get through life. So, I see no reason why I shouldn't continue to see her. Family? Is that what you're calling it? Megan sneered again. I don't care how hard you've worked for your sister. That doesn't mean we have to accept it. Miles spoke up as well. Calm down, Megan. John, it's not that we distrust you. We just want Kate to have the right environment, suitable for someone in our family. Are you saying I'm not good enough for Kate? I raised my voice slightly, but at that moment, Miles stepped forward and spoke in a low voice. Yes. Your background is a significant problem for us. My background? I frowned. Yes. Miles replied coldly. In our family, education and social status are important. Someone who lacks those qualities cannot be part of our family. Those words tightened around my chest. The fear that had been lingering inside me for so long had now materialized and stood firmly in front of me. But even then, I had no intention of backing down. Still, I will continue seeing my sister. There's nothing wrong with remaining in her life as her only family. How many times do I have to say it? Don't ever show your face in front of us again. Megan's words were sharp and forceful. At that moment, something snapped inside me. Words were no longer enough. I realized that I could never make them understand why I had been protecting Kate all these years. Miles, who had remained silent, finally spoke. If you insist on continuing to see Kyle and Kate, we'll ask Kate to pursue legal action. You do understand that we have the power to make that happen, don't you? Oomph. There's no way a middle school graduate could understand that. Both Miles and Megan looked at me with cold, disdainful eyes. But my resolve was stronger than their contempt. No matter what obstacles were in my way, I had a past where I had protected Kate and lived with her through everything. Miles spoke again. Prepare yourself to cut all ties with our family. His icy words weighed heavily on me. I will never stop seeing my sister. I said it with determination. There was a moment of silence. I tried to break the uncomfortable tension by speaking, but no words came out. I knew that no matter what I said, I couldn't change their minds. Just then, Kate and Kyle returned from their meeting. Kate, looking a bit tired, smiled softly at me. But the moment she saw my face, her smile faded, and she looked at me with concern. John, are you okay? I nodded slightly and said to Kate, I'm fine. Don't worry. Kate and Kyle sat beside me and exchanged small talk with his parents, but the atmosphere remained tense. Megan continued to ignore me throughout, and Miles barely spoke a word to me. Our first meeting had ended in complete discord. From that day forward, I had a sense that my relationship with Kyle's parents would only become more strained. However, I wouldn't change my stance. I was determined to protect my bond with Kate and face any challenge to ensure her happiness. 6 months passed, and my relationship with the Turner family had almost completely broken down. Neither I nor Kyle's parents had made any contact since that day. I kept in touch with Kate occasionally, talking about the wedding preparations. But I avoided asking too much to keep her out of the conflict with her in-laws. During this time, I told my wife, Emily, about everything that had happened. Emily, for years younger than me, was strong-willed and outspoken. She didn't hide her anger when it came to the insults from Kyle's parents. I can't believe they said that, just to protect their own status. I'll make sure they get what's coming to them someday. Emily would say things like that, but I tried my best to keep things from escalating. The last thing I wanted was for any problems to arise at Kate's big day, her wedding. Finally, the wedding day arrived. The ceremony was held at a luxurious hotel, with hundreds of guests attending. I went to the venue with Emily, and we waited in the dressing room until the ceremony began. Today is your sister's special day, so you're going to keep calm even if those two try something, right? Emily looked at me as she asked. Of course. For Kate's sake, I won't make a big deal out of anything, no matter what happens. I answered, trying to calm myself. But as we were shown to our seats in the venue, something unexpected happened. The nameplate on my seat had the unbelievable words "Middle School Graduate Dummy" engraved on it. What is this supposed to mean? I was speechless as I stared at the nameplate. Emily, too, saw it and her face immediately darkened with anger. Is this some kind of joke? I called over the staff and asked for an explanation, but they only looked confused. I'm terribly sorry, but this nameplate was made at the request of the groom's family. Hearing that, the anger I had been holding back flared up. This was definitely the work of Kyle's parents. Excuse me, but what exactly is the meaning of this? I spoke quietly but firmly, trying to avoid drawing too much attention. At that moment, Miles appeared in front of me. With a cold smile, he shrugged slightly. Oh, I'm not sure what you mean. We simply gave an honest assessment. His words nearly made me snap. But this was a wedding. I couldn't ruin Kate's special day. Do you understand what that name means? I struggled to stay calm, while Miles maintained his indifferent attitude, laughing dismissively. Of course. But someone with no education or culture like you doesn't really need a proper nameplate, does he? That's going too far. Emily snapped at him, but I held her back. I had to endure this. No matter what we said, causing a scene here would only hurt Kate. I had no choice but to bear it. The wedding ceremony began and proceeded without incident. However, the tense atmosphere lingered. I was scheduled to give a speech as part of the bride's family. I had spent days preparing and memorizing the speech. But as the groom's side finished their speeches, my name was never called. Feeling uneasy, I went to ask the staff. Their response shocked me. We were informed by the groom's family that, due to circumstances, the speech has been cancelled. What? For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what was happening, but I quickly realized the truth. This was yet another scheme by Kyle's parents, designed to humiliate me. They must have cancelled my speech to embarrass me further. I can't take this anymore. I instructed the staff to call Miles and Megan to the lobby. As I waited in the lobby, Kyle's parents slowly appeared. Both of them wore smug, triumphant expressions. I heard my speech was cancelled. Care to explain why? I demanded, and Megan responded with a cold smile. We can't possibly let someone like you, a middle school graduate, give a speech in front of everyone. It would disgrace our family. Her words caused all the anger I had been suppressing to explode. All the insults, the dismissiveness, and the harassment during the wedding, it was too much. There was no reason left to hold back. Just then, Emily appeared behind me and gently tapped my arm. John, what are we going to do? Emily asked calmly, though the anger in her eyes was unmistakable. I took a deep breath and looked straight at Kyle's parents. You clearly have no idea what I've accomplished, I said firmly. Miles snorted in disdain. And what's that supposed to mean? Do you think someone like you could have any impact on us? At that moment, Emily spoke quietly. Shall we crush them, Mr. Smith, the CEO? Hearing her words, I nodded slowly. Yeah, let's crush them. For a brief moment, both Miles and Megan looked shocked, but they quickly regained their sneering expressions. You? A CEO? Come on, no matter what you try, it won't affect us. Go ahead, tell us you're ending some deal or something. Miles scoffed as he spoke. Deals? Well, as it happens, the company manufacturing the digital systems for Miles's government-led digitization project is mine. He was shocked. Their faces immediately changed at my words. What are you saying? Miles frowned. The project that you're so proud of, the digital transformation you're pushing, it's my company that's behind it. And I've just decided to cancel the contract today. At those words, their faces froze completely. No way. You're the CEO of Martin Electronics? But I thought Kelvin Martin was the CEO. That's right. Emily cut him off. Could you explain, as my lead secretary, Emily? Mr. Martin retired last year, and John was appointed as CEO, based on his years of experience and his pivotal role in developing cutting-edge AI-based digital systems. He was highly recommended by the former CEO, Mr. Martin. I believe you boasted about being close to him in the media, but you didn't know about it. Did you? This can't be true. It's a joke, right? Megan said, her face pale. If you think it's a joke, go ahead and check our company's website on your phone, Emily said calmly. Megan pulled out her phone and looked at the website, where my picture and greeting as CEO were displayed. John, you're not serious about canceling the deal, are you? If this project doesn't move forward, we're finished. We're family. So you wouldn't do something that cold, right? I shook my head calmly. No, I'm serious. If you keep disrespecting me, I'll take the necessary steps, and that means canceling the deal. Megan's voice trembled, and she could no longer hide her panic. The project Miles was leading was crucial for the Turner family's reputation. If it collapsed, their social standing would be severely impacted, and I knew that well. Wait. That can't happen. If the project stalls, we'll lose everything. Megan raised her voice in desperation. I'm fully aware of how important this project is for your family. Yet you've refused to acknowledge my role in it and have continued to insult me. You should regret that. I continued, my voice steady but firm. Miles, momentarily speechless, quickly grew agitated and shouted. Don't think you can stop the deal that easily. You know how much power we have. Emily smiled coldly and responded. You'll soon find out how much your power really counts. Besides, maybe we should have rethought everything from the beginning. The days of looking down on people based on their education or status are long over. Both of their faces turned pale in an instant. For the first time, they were being forced to confront the reality that everything they had built could crumble. I watched them calmly and continued. This is Kate's wedding, her special day. I've held my tongue and endured for her sake, but there's a limit to how much I can take. My speech was cancelled, my name was insulted. What more do you plan to do? Miles looked like he was about to retort, but Megan stopped him. She looked at us with fear in her eyes and spoke in a trembling voice. John, isn't that going a bit too far? We admit we might have gone too far with some of the things we said. So, please, can we just forget about this? Don't think an apology is enough to make this right. I dismissed Megan's words coldly. What you've done to me isn't something that can be brushed aside with a simple apology. Besides, it's too late for that. My decision stands. So the deal is over. Wait. John, that's too harsh. Miles raised his voice again, but I wasn't backing down. Just then, Emily took a quiet breath and offered a suggestion. There is one possible way. If you publicly apologize for all the insults we've received, we might reconsider. Publicly. Megan's face showed confusion. Yes. You will have to stand in front of everyone and admit to the insults you've thrown at us and apologize sincerely. If you can do that, we'll think about reopening the deal. There's no way we can do that. Miles erupted angrily. Emily remained calm as she continued. Then, there's nothing more to discuss. Whatever happens next will be a result of your own choices. Miles and Megan couldn't say another word. As we turned to leave, they stood frozen in place, visibly trembling. The wedding proceeded smoothly afterward. I felt bad for Kate, but luckily, she didn't seem to notice any of the tension. At the end of the reception, I gave my heartfelt congratulations to Kate and Kyle, sincerely wishing them happiness. I wanted to believe that my actions, putting Kate's happiness first, had been the right choice. After the wedding, Miles and Megan reached out multiple times to apologize, but we ignored every attempt. We had no intention of reopening negotiations until they genuinely reflected on their behavior and apologized without burdening Kate. Weeks passed, and within us was a quiet determination. Then, a few weeks later, Miles and Megan publicly apologized for the insults they had hurled at us. They held a press conference, admitting their wrongdoing, including the events at the wedding. The media coverage of the apology delivered a devastating blow to the Turner family's reputation. The Turner family's name has really hit rock bottom, hasn't it? Yeah, it sure has. After witnessing their public apology, we finally moved forward with discussions to resume the deal. Though our relationship with Kyle's parents remained cold, they kept their promise and never insulted us again. Well, I guess that settles everything, Emily said with a smile. Yeah, but in the end, they had no choice but to change. If we hadn't stood up to them, they'd still be the same. I exhaled deeply, feeling a small sense of relief. But this was for the best. I'm proud of how strong you've been. As Emily smiled at me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude that she had always been by my side. A few months later, Miles's downfall sent shockwaves through the entire Turner family. With his project collapsing, Miles's credibility crumbled, and his subordinates began abandoning him one by one. Miles and Megan were forced to watch as everything they had built fell apart in an instant, unable to hide their panic and regret. Kyle and Kate also reached a point where they had to reconsider their relationship with the Turner family. Though Kyle had desperately tried to live up to his parents' expectations, he realized that their behavior was causing them both pain. He finally decided to cut ties. Kate, our life is ours. We can't let my parents control us anymore. Kate agreed with his decision, and together they severed ties with the Turner family. Miles and Megan were shocked and opposed their decision, but Kyle's resolve was unshakable. Kyle and Kate decided to build their new life together, leaving the Turner family behind. Kate continued to deepen her career as a lawyer, dedicating herself to family law and supporting children who had lost their parents in accidents. Through her experiences, she shared her thoughts with me. John, I want to help children like us who lost their parents. I want to create an organization that can provide them with a safe place to live. Her words moved me deeply, and I immediately offered my full support. That's a great idea. I'll help out too. Thank you. Kyle said he'd help as well. Can I count on you if we need any advice? Of course. Whether it's funding or anything else, I'll support you however I can. Martin Electronics had experienced significant growth in recent years, thanks to its AI-driven digitalization efforts. It was no longer a small local business but a renowned major company. With my company providing financial support, Kate's organization was sure to get off the ground quickly. Together, Kate and Kyle began working toward establishing the support organization. The organization focused on helping children who had lost their parents due to accidents or family issues, and its efforts gradually expanded. My company became one of its sponsors, and soon, the organization achieved great success. One day, Kate excitedly shared some good news with a smile. John, one of the kids we've been supporting, was successfully adopted by a new family. I was genuinely happy to hear that and felt proud of her growth. You're really amazing. Let's keep working together and keep this going. Through this, Kate and I strengthened our bond as siblings and moved forward together toward a brighter future. By severing ties with the Turner family, we were able to take a new step and build our lives on our own terms. I just noticed an important-looking document on your desk and called in a rush. You need it today, don't you? The person on the other end was Stephen, the manager who always seemed to target Emily. Yes, but we just talked about handling documents more carefully, didn't we? Well, it's probably too late now anyway. His tone sounded as if he'd waited to call until he was sure it was too late for the meeting. Though it was only his voice over the phone, I could easily imagine his smug smile. That's... Emily looked at me, hesitating with her words. What am I supposed to do now? Interpreting complex matters like this on the spot, only someone fluent in English could pull it off. Fluent in English? Suddenly, Mr. Nash's face lit up, as though he just had an idea. Mr. Nash? Emily tilted her head slightly, looking at him with curiosity. Emily, we have someone here who's fluent in English. I meet the gaze of Mr. Nash. He looks directly at me and says, Sean, I need your help. My name is Sean. In my 40s now, my waistline has become a bit more noticeable, something that never used to bother me. My current job is as a driver for the president of a household goods company. Every morning, I drive to the president's home, then take him to the office or to his business appointments. In the fast-paced world of household goods, keeping up with consumer needs is no easy feat. The company I drive for, Taro Corporation, has gained some attention on social media recently. Though not a major player, it's well known in its field, and with social media's rise, its performance has grown steadily. Mr. Nash, the president I drive for, is about my age but keeps fit, is tall, and carries himself with style. He has an easygoing charm and is hard to forget once you meet him. I, on the other hand, am often told, you look familiar, even though it's usually by people I've never met. In other words, I have one of those faces that blends in anywhere. One day, when I picked up Mr. Nash for his usual workday, he handed me a small wrapped package. Mr. Nash? What's this? Take it. A client gave it to me, but I don't need more of these. I unwrapped it and found a small golden cat figurine. It might look cute on a desk, but as a man in my 40s, I wasn't sure what to do with it. Unfortunately, as a driver, I don't even have my own desk at work. Thank you. Noticing my hesitant reaction, Mr. Nash raised an eyebrow and said, Try looking a bit more appreciative. By the way, it's supposedly made of pure gold. What? I was startled and almost dropped a cat figurine, but my reaction seemed to amuse Mr. Nash, who chuckled as he got into the car. After carefully putting the cat figurine in my pocket, I closed the back door. Like most companies, President has a secretary responsible for managing the president's schedule and other tasks. Mr. Nash is no exception, and the person who rides with him most frequently in the company car I drive is his secretary, Emily. Emily is a talented, beautiful young woman who was selected as Mr. Nash's secretary early in her career. With a strong sense of responsibility, she anticipates tasks well in advance, although she's quite reserved and not much of a talker. Because of her quiet nature, she isn't the type to confront others, even when she overhears whispers about herself from colleagues. I haven't personally heard any comments, but rumor has it that Emily is disliked by her supervisor in the secretary department, Stephen. When Mr. Nash's former secretary retired, he personally chose Emily to take on the role. At the time, Stephen, who was an experienced senior secretary, probably didn't appreciate this decision, as Emily was a rookie with only about a year of experience at the company. I can understand Stephen's reasoning that someone with more experience should have the job, but he's still complaining, even though it was Mr. Nash's own decision. At that time, Stephen was still an assistant manager, but he was later promoted to manager and took on the responsibility of overseeing the department. However, he seems to have a naturally persistent personality. He still appears to treat Emily rather harshly. Even though Emily is Mr. Nash's secretary, she doesn't stick to him constantly. She spends much of her time at her desk handling office work. Working in an uncomfortable environment within her own department must be a big source of stress for her. Stephen often speaks to Emily in a harsh tone. Emily, being cautious, rarely makes big mistakes, but everyone slips up sometimes. Other colleagues would typically get off with a simple "be careful next time," but only Emily is always criticized by Stephen excessively. Colleagues are too afraid to stand up for her, fearing that defending her might put them in Stephen's bad books. They'll chat with her when he's not around, but it seems no one is willing to shield her from him. That day, on the way to a client, Mr. Nash asked me to make a quick stop, so I pulled over. "Wait here a minute," he instructed, leaving me and Emily waiting in the car. Emily, usually so calm, looked somewhat down that day and sighed quietly. "Are you okay? You seem a bit tired." "Huh? Oh, is it that obvious?" When I spoke to her, Emily responded in a flustered manner. "Oh. No, I didn't mean you looked tired, more like, I just sensed it." I realized too late that mentioning her appearance might be rude and tried to cover it up. Do I really look that bad? Stephen had a lot to say to me earlier. Of course, Stephen was the reason. Did he give you a hard time again? Sometimes, like today, Mr. Nash leaves Emily and me in the car while he goes off to handle his own errands. During those times, I usually chat with Emily while we wait, and naturally, the conversation often turns to matters related to the secretary department. Emily's sighs are nearly always caused by Stephen. This morning, I was looking over the minutes from our meeting when Mr. Nash called me, so I left my seat. I just put the notes in my desk drawer. Emily, the president's secretary, always prioritizes the president above all in her work. She constantly puts her own administrative tasks on hold, which I think must be a tough job. Minutes are confidential, but I plan to file them in the cabinet as soon as I got back. She explained that Mr. Nash always keeps meetings brief, so even when called, she's not gone long. But even those brief moments don't escape Stephen's notice. When you got back, Stephen was waiting for you. Yeah, it was barely a couple of minutes, but Stephen told me it doesn't matter if it's 1 minute or two. I shouldn't have left those confidential documents outside the cabinet. I could almost picture Stephen's smug face. It's like he's on a mission to spot even the smallest of her mistakes. But they were in your drawer, right? Leaving them out might be bad, but for a couple of minutes, and with no one around. We rarely have outside visitors to our department, but even so, it wasn't the right thing to do. I know it was my fault, but when he keeps pushing, it really makes me down. It seems Stephen has made it his mission to never miss an opportunity to find fault with Emily. He's practically satisfied to make her feel small over the tiniest things. Maybe you should talk to Mr. Nash about it sometime? I doubt anyone in the department would dare call Stephen out on his attitude. I started to worry that if this situation continued, Emily might eventually reach her breaking point. No. I can't just bring something like this up to Mr. Nash. I just need to step up and work flawlessly so even Stephen can't find any faults. From what I could see, Emily handled her work exceptionally well, and I'd never seen Mr. Nash criticize her about anything. On the contrary, he was often quite proud when a client would compliment his assistant. Really? Well, if things do get out of hand, leaning on others could be an option. Better to avoid anything irreversible. You're right, but I'd still like to try a bit longer on my own. She gave me a smile as she said it. I wondered if I'd somehow pressured her into saying that, but honestly, all I could do at that moment was listen. Got it. Just don't overdo it, okay? Thank you. Just then, Mr. Nash returned to the car, having finished his errands. Oh, Emily, do you have today's contract with Goodness? Goodness was the industry's largest lifestyle goods manufacturer and clearly a market leader. They were about to launch a major project with Taro Corporation. Today was the day we'd head to Goodness headquarters for the contract signing. Yes, of course. I've never handled a $10 million deal before. It's definitely nerve-wracking. But as she rummaged through her bag, I saw her expression turn pale. Well, I have the English files. Emily? Excuse me. Please give me a moment. Her tense tone changed the atmosphere in the car in an instant. She frantically overturned her bag, but it seemed that what she was looking for wasn't there. No way, I was sure I'd put it in here. Staring blankly into her bag, Emily's voice sounded dazed. Apparently, the critical documents for the $10 million deal were nowhere to be found. Even Mr. Nash looked momentarily speechless in shock. But at the same time, I wondered. Would someone as meticulous as Emily really make such a mistake? I'd watched Emily and Mr. Nash head off to meetings like this several times, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Emily, being as responsible as she was, always said she'd double-check her bag to avoid any slip-ups. Yet, I reminded myself that Emily was only human, so mistakes are possible. As I thought back to our earlier conversation, Stephen's face came to mind, but even if he disliked her, could he really sabotage such a crucial company project? When's the meeting scheduled? I turned to ask, and she replied, looking paler than ever. It's at 1 p.m., but we're not going to make it back in time. The clock showed 12:30. There was no way we'd make it back to the office in time. Emily looked at Mr. Nash with tears in her eyes. Mr. Nash, I lost the critical file. Oh boy. English isn't my strong suit at all. Mr. Nash held his head in his hands as Emily lowered her gaze, still pale. I do have the Japanese documents, but they said the overseas division would be there today. Apparently, this project with Goodness was an international collaboration. Emily mentioned $10 million earlier, which would make this Taro Corporation's first international deal. Naturally, we didn't want to risk such a significant project failing. Yeah. I just don't think I can explain all this contract information fluently in English. Mr. Nash glanced at the Japanese version of the contract. Interpreting all this complex information on the spot, only someone fluent in English could pull it off. Fluent in English? Wait, hold on. Suddenly, Mr. Nash looked as if he had an idea and lifted his head. Mr. Nash? Emily glanced at him, tilting her head in confusion. Emily. We have someone fluent in English right here. I meet Mr. Nash's gaze. He looks directly at me and speaks. Sean, I need you to do this. What? Wait, what are you talking about? In my shock, I momentarily forgot that I was Mr. Nash driver. Come on. You can handle this, right? Mr. Nash clasped his hands in front of him, practically bowing as if asking to borrow some class notes. You can't just spring this on me. Why me, anyway? I shook my head in disbelief, but Mr. Nash leaned toward me in the driver's seat, practically pleading. This is the company's future on the line. It's a $10 million deal. His eyes were serious. But I couldn't just agree that easily. After all, I was just the driver now. Don't put a $10 million deal on the shoulders of the driver. You know I've been out of practice. Mr. Nash was right. I used to be good at English. But that was back in my student days, and I hadn't used it since starting this job. I know, but you can do it. You were part of all those debates in supervision, right? Supervision, that was ages ago. Hearing that word brought back old memories, and I felt myself starting to drift back to my college days. I couldn't fall for it, this was exactly what Mr. Nash wanted. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Emily, who had been left out of the loop, looked between us, wide-eyed. Just then, her phone rang. Oh, it's the office. Excuse me, I need to take this. While Emily took the call, Mr. Nash and I continued our whispered back and forth, me saying no way, and him pleading, please. Wait, hold on. Suddenly, Emily raised her voice, and both Mr. Nash and I turned to look at her. Noticing something unusual, Mr. Nash whispered to Emily, put it on speaker. While continuing the conversation, Emily switched the phone to speaker mode. I'm sure I put it in my bag. I even double-checked. I didn't leave it on my desk. Oh? Well, I just happened to notice some important-looking papers on your desk and thought I'd give you a call. You sure you won't be needing them today? The voice on the line was indeed Stephen's. Yes, but we just talked about handling important documents, didn't we? Although I'm sure it's all too late by now. It was as if he had waited until he was sure we wouldn't make it in time to call. Even over the phone, I could practically see the smug look on his face. That's Emily glanced at me, her words faltering. What was I supposed to do here? What do you intend to do about this colossal mistake? Huh? Did you think you could still stay on as the president's secretary after this? Stephen's tone was sharp and cutting. I swear, I put it in my bag. Enough already. It wasn't in there, was it? If it were, you wouldn't be in this mess right now. Emily flinched at his harsh tone. Was she used to being reprimanded like this all the time? You're finished. Acting all high and mighty just because you're the president's secretary, and as a newbie, no less. Aren't you embarrassed, carrying around a childish bag like that as an adult? Emily was startled, then reached for a small pouch scattered on the back seat. The contents of her bag were still strewn around from when she'd been searching for the document. She gripped it tightly, trying to hide it from Mr. Nash and me. It looked well worn, as if she'd had it for years. So, immature tastes lead to immature work, huh? We don't need someone who makes these kinds of mistakes in the executive assistant team. Stephen's mocking laughter echoed through the phone. The cruel remarks made me want to cover my ears. But then it hit me. How did Stephen know what was inside Emily's bag? Judging by Emily's reaction, I wondered if this pouch was something she usually kept hidden away, tucked safely in her bag. It confirmed my suspicion that Stephen was involved in the document's disappearance. I was now certain of it. He must have taken the file when Emily left her desk momentarily for Mr. Nash. A small pouch like this wouldn't have been visible unless someone peeked inside her bag. Emily remained silent, looking down with a face that seemed on the verge of tears. She didn't just look discouraged from having her mistake pointed out, and it was the kind of sadness you see when something precious has been belittled. I couldn't stand the thought of seeing her look so defeated any longer. If I wanted to stop Stephen's tirade, there was only one way. Forget the document. I'll accompany you to the meeting and handle the English. Just moments before, I wouldn't have believed I'd say something like that. Emily looked up, startled, while Mr. Nash pumped his fist in a triumphant yes. Thank you, Sean. Here's the Japanese version of the document. As Mr. Nash handed me the file, I gave him a hesitant look and quickly skimmed through it. But there was no time. With only minutes left, I'd have to translate it on the spot during the meeting. I told you I'm rusty, and now I have to translate something this complicated. I let out my frustration, but Mr. Nash didn't seem fazed in the slightest. Then Emily suddenly exclaimed, "Oh!" I was so startled that I accidentally hung up the call. I couldn't help but wonder what Stephen's face must have looked like when he realized the call had ended without warning. He had no idea who'd spoken up in my place. I felt a pang of doubt. Could I really pull this off for Emily's sake? The only real experience I had was from my student days, and it had been years since I'd used English regularly, even though I had some work experience with it back then. But I couldn't just leave Emily to deal with Stephen's petty schemes alone. It reminded me too much of myself back then. I, too, had once believed that I had to handle everything on my own, without relying on anyone. In the end, I'd failed. I didn't want Emily to make the same mistake. As I was desperately recalling all the English I could muster while staring at the documents, Mr. Nash cut through my thoughts. It's time, Sean. He stepped out of the car confidently and strode into Goodness headquarters. He greeted the receptionist with an easy familiarity, making small talk as he led the way. Watching him walk ahead, I felt a strange sense of nostalgia. His back seemed to say, "I don't doubt for a second that you'll do this." Ever since I'd known him, Mr. Nash had always placed his trust in others so easily. And somehow, that trust made me feel like I could do it, too. I'd always thought he was suited to be a leader, even back in the day. And here he was, actually becoming a president. How many years has it been since then? Tyler Nash and I first met back in high school, before he became president. We were attending a well-known college preparatory school in the area, and we became friends after being seated near each other in class. Tyler was tall and lean, with a laid-back attitude and an easy charm that made him popular with the girls. Meanwhile, I was a smart student but not particularly social at the time, so people often asked him, "Why are you friends with Sean?" Each time, he'd reply, "Sean's amazing," or "Sean has a unique perspective," and always spoke well of me. At first, I thought he was just teasing, but he genuinely seemed to believe it. He'd even listened earnestly to my then ridiculous dreams without a hint of judgment. There was a famous economist who was well known for America's New Deal, John Maynard Keynes. Reading his works had sparked my interest in economics, and I started dreaming of studying at Cambridge, where Keynes himself had gone. I've always liked studying, and my grades were good. However, deciding to seriously apply to Cambridge University was a whole different story. There were excellent schools in Japan to study economics, so some might think it wasn't necessary to go all the way to England. And even if I made it into Cambridge after all that effort, I didn't have any clear plans for what I'd do afterward. My only motivation was wanting to study in the same environment as Keynes. I had spent a year in a British boarding school during middle school, so I had no trouble with everyday English. But competing with the world's best students? That would require real resolve. With nothing but this trendy motivation, I didn't think I'd get very far. When I told Tyler about it, though, his eyes lit up as he said, "That's awesome." Annoyed, I snapped, "Don't just say that offhand," but he repeated himself. "You should go for it. Easy for you to say. You can do it." He looked at me with an unwavering gaze. Even as the top student in my class, I knew Cambridge wasn't going to be easy. It's the kind of highly competitive university where, even if I threw everything aside to focus on studying, I'd still have a higher chance of failing. By the way, what was your ranking on the last test? I think I was about 30th from the bottom. Tyler was one of those naturally quick thinkers who could do well if he studied, but I'd never seen him put in real effort. He liked to coast along, as he put it, staying comfortably at the lower ranks. If you told me you wanted to aim for the Tokyo University because of your hero Kurt Thompson, I'd probably stop you. Who's Kurt Thompson? That's not the point. He laughed, then gave me a serious look again. I'd support you, though. His direct gaze startled me, and I found myself looking away. Are you crazy, aiming for Cambridge? Why would you go abroad? What are you trying to prove? Not only did he not mock my ambitions like that, but he even said, "I'll support you." I was so moved by his words that I felt embarrassed and couldn't look up. Hey, are you blushing? Shut up. I stood up abruptly and dashed out of the classroom. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I could do anything. Maybe it sounds foolish, but Tyler's encouragement gave me the motivation to start preparing for Cambridge. With me studying hard by his side, he suddenly decided, "All right, I'll aim for Tokyo University then," and to my amazement, he got in. I remember feeling a bit intimidated by his potential. I also managed to pass the Cambridge entrance exam, and since no one from our school had ever been admitted, the entire school was in an uproar. It's often said that graduating from a university overseas is harder than getting accepted, and that certainly felt true. I thought I had studied the hardest during entrance exam preparation, but once I entered university, the challenges were far greater. But that's Cambridge University, known as one of the highest-ranking institutions internationally. Students come from all over the world, bringing diverse perspectives and ideas. In addition to regular lectures, Cambridge offers supervision, small group sessions of 1 to 3 students. These sessions focus on deeply exploring specialized topics, and preparing for them was no easy task. Just keeping up with the daily classes was a struggle, and letting my guard down even a little meant I'd fall behind. I spent countless days buried in the historic library, absorbed in books, a tough but incredibly stimulating experience. I attended the same university as Keynes and studied economics. At first, that alone was enough for me. But as I talked about future dreams with others studying economics, I began to get a clearer picture of what I wanted to do. While some aimed to work in consulting or start businesses abroad, I felt a strong desire to apply what I learned here back in Japan. I thought that working as a government official in a central ministry might be a way to contribute to Japanese society. With that goal, I graduated from Cambridge University, aiming for a career in the civil service. But from this point on, my life took an unexpected turn. For the first few years after joining the ministry, I was so busy that I barely have any memory of that time. In the bureaucracy, there's a career rotation system where you're transferred every 2 to 3 years. I transferred about 3 times, and although the workload was relentless, I managed to avoid conflicts within each department. However, unlike my student days, when effort could overcome most challenges, I soon realized that relationships between people aren't something that can be solved through hard work alone. In my new department, I began struggling with my interactions with a senior official. Even in the ministry, the hierarchy between bosses and subordinates, as well as seniors and juniors, is much like that of a typical company. Each department had many capable senior officials, but there was one person I just couldn't get along with. While I could take constructive criticism, this person frequently interfered with my personal life. He mocked my personality and mannerisms as if they were something to laugh at. At first, I tried to go along without causing trouble, but the continuous pressure of long hours and unrelenting work began to wear me down mentally and physically. His words were like small, constant pricks to my heart. If it had been only once, I could have brushed it off, but the accumulation over time became painful. As I endured, the wounds grew deeper, and the pain became unbearable. Working in the central ministry, being at the heart of the government, was as busy as one would expect. During parliamentary sessions, every ministry is overwhelmed. My department was no exception, and late nights became the norm. One day, I collapsed during work. My mind and body had reached their limit. And that was the end of my career. It was my 10th year in the ministry. After 10 years of relentless work and mental anguish, I had finally reached a point where I couldn't continue. In hindsight, it was my first experience of failure in life. Fortunately, after a short rest, my physical health improved significantly, but healing my mind was a much harder task. Studying had always been manageable, and I had friends who understood me. I used to think I could push through anything if I tried hard enough, but this experience made me realize there are limits. As I sat in the hospital, gazing out the window, wondering what to do next after quitting my job, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my friend Tyler. We had stayed in touch over the years, reaching out about once a year since high school. Recently, we'd both been too busy to meet, but reading his familiar, quirky writing from high school warmed my heart. I'm in the hospital now. Collapsed. Watch yourself. When I replied honestly about my situation, Tyler, usually so nonchalant, rushed over to the hospital, visibly concerned. Upon seeing me, he looked relieved and said, "Hey, you look fine." As we enjoyed the reunion, I shared the story of my resignation and the heavy thoughts I was carrying. Tyler listened intently. I've always liked having a goal to work toward, but now, I have nothing. It felt as if there was a hole in my heart, draining away all my motivation and energy. I had never experienced anything like it before. Then maybe you don't need to do anything right now. Tyler said this in his usual laid-back way. That might be true, but I can't just keep doing nothing forever. I sighed, and Tyler suddenly looked as if he'd had an idea. So, how about being a driver? I just happened to be looking for one. A driver? Like for a taxi? No, my own personal driver. I realized I hadn't asked him about his recent life, and it turned out Tyler had become a president. He always seemed suited for leadership, but to think that the same guy who was near the bottom in high school tests had become the head of a company with many employees was surprising, to say the least. And so, I became Mr. Nash's driver. When we entered the conference room, the employees from Goodness were already gathered. Mr. Nash greeted the person who seemed to be the head of their international division in English. I thought to myself, so, he can speak English after all, as I introduced myself and the meeting began. Since I'd only had a brief moment to glance over the documents, I translated on the fly, pushing my mind to its limits. There were some rough spots, but my English seemed to get the message across, and the negotiation progressed smoothly, ending with a contract. We secured a $10 million deal. Emily watched the entire exchange, mouth agape, listening to my English. Sean. That was amazing. When we returned to the car, Emily, still excited, spoke to me as I settled into the driver's seat. Oh, thanks. I'm just glad it worked out. Phew, that was a relief. As I translated my hardest in the meeting, Mr. Nash had just sat back, seemingly calm, which had me wondering if he'd ever felt nervous at all. The confidence was almost irritating. He trusts me a bit too much. I'm heading back to the office, but next time, it's your turn. When I hinted about Emily and Stephen, Mr. Nash nodded and said, I know. Handling things like this is part of my job. I was planning to handle things with Stephen on my own. It's my responsibility that things escalated this way. I'm very sorry. Emily bowed deeply toward Mr. Nash and me. Emily. I know Sean advised me not to carry this all alone. Watching Emily, I saw a bit of my past self. If you keep holding it in, there's only so much you can bear before hitting your limit. You have to act before it comes to that. I hadn't been able to lean on anyone, but I didn't want Emily to end up like me. Don't worry. Thanks to Sean, it didn't turn into the worst-case scenario, right? Tyler said proudly as if it were his achievement. Well, you did help me pick my college back then. Mr. Nash didn't miss the words I muttered under my breath. Ha? Thanks to me? Did I do something? Shut up. It's nothing. Too embarrassed to explain further, I turned back to the driver's seat. Come on, tell me. Emily, unable to contain herself, burst into laughter at Mr. Nash's clueless tone. Her bright laughter filled the car. When Mr. Nash summoned Stephen, he hadn't realized that his exchanges with Emily had reached Mr. Nash's ears, and he practically fell to the ground in shock. I'm so sorry. Stephen bowed so low his head almost hit the floor. Even though it didn't go all the way, as a company, we couldn't ignore the potential damage Stephen had attempted to cause. Instead of apologizing to me, there's someone else you need to apologize to first. When Stephen timidly lifted his head, he found Emily standing right in front of him. Mr. Nash, I've already. Having to admit defeat to someone he's looked down on for being a newcomer and lacking experience. It's hard to imagine a greater humiliation for Stephen. I'm sorry. Just as he stammered out the words, his shoulders shaking, Mr. Nash spoke firmly, I can't hear you. I am very sorry. Seeing the usually calm Mr. Nash raise his voice, Stephen seemed too stunned to even be confused. Emily told me excitedly that she'd never seen Mr. Nash like that before. As for Emily's pouch, the very thing that had led to her catching on to Stephen's schemes, she later explained that to me herself. Surprisingly, Emily was known for forgetting things a lot as a child. Her mother had given her that well-worn pouch as a charm, saying, "Keep this with you to help you remember." Ever since then, Emily somehow stopped forgetting things. Now, even though it's mostly for luck, she feels a bit uneasy without it. It's so worn out now that I wouldn't want anyone to see it. It's just a charm, Emily said, holding it tightly with a hint of embarrassment yet with clear affection. As for Stephen, he was transferred to a different department after years of dominating the secretary division. His new role had nothing in common with the secretarial duties, so he's struggling, not knowing where to start. Now he's being taught by younger employees and even talked about behind his back as useless. The other day, I spotted him eating lunch alone in the cafeteria, looking rather forlorn. My days felt like a long vacation. Though outwardly, I was Mr. Nash's driver, all I'd been doing was giving a friend a lift. It's not that I thought driving was easy, but stepping into a completely different line of work gave me a fresh perspective and sparked a desire to take on something new. I'll need to find a new driver, Mr. Nash said as I opened the back door. Today was my last day giving him a lift. You'll find someone in no time. So, have you decided what you're doing next? Yeah. An old friend from my time in England reached out recently. Strangely enough, a friend from college contacted me after years. He offered me a chance to work together on a project. A year ago, I probably would have turned it down without a second thought. But I'm sure that successfully closing that high-stakes deal the other day played a role in shifting my mindset. Being in that intense atmosphere felt like it unlocked something within me. So, you're going back to England? Yeah, I think it'll be good to visit after all this time. It's a startup, so it looks promising. I can look forward now. It's thanks to Mr. Nash, who reached out when I was at my lowest. I don't quite know how to thank him, and it's a bit embarrassing to say too much. You're excited, aren't you? Well, yeah. When you're like this, things usually turn out fine. Mr. Nash said that and laughed. What's that supposed to mean? You've got this. It was exactly what I needed to hear. The words that would keep me going more than any others. With those words, I felt like I could face any challenges that lay ahead. Thanks. As I turned around and spoke softly, Mr. Nash didn't miss a word. What was that? Annoyed by his teasing grin, I gave him a hard pat on the back to cover my embarrassment. Well, I'm short-staffed over there. Mind if I recruit Emily? Absolutely not. Today marked the end of our relationship as driver and boss. But our bond would remain unchanged from here on. Imagining the bright futures that awaited us, we set out on our own paths. Actually, I was kicked out just 3 minutes after the meeting started. They said I was out of place because I was incompetent. What did you just say? I couldn't hide my shock at such an outrageous remark, my voice rising in disbelief. As I listened to the details of their exchange, I could feel my face turning red with anger. When she finished telling me what happened, I quickly pulled out my phone and dialed a certain number. Hello, thank you for your time. I apologize for the interruption, but let me get straight to the point. We're canceling the $70 million contract. I stated it flatly, hanging up without waiting for a response. The anger from my subordinate being insulted surged through me like molten lava, fueling every fiber of my being. My name is John. I'm a 36-year-old employee in the sales department of Clean Industries. From negotiating with clients to working at my desk, I lead a busy life. After being with the company for over a decade, I now also take on the role of training new employees, focusing on developing younger talent. This year, I was assigned to mentor one of our employees, so I reviewed the reference materials. Her name is Emma. With her straight black hair and warm, expressive eyes, she's quite stunning. She has an aura that makes people do a double take, almost as if she were a celebrity or actress. However, her hiring wasn't based solely on her appearance. Though she's only in her 3rd year, she's shown promise with her fresh insights and practical ideas. However, she's a bit reserved, making it difficult for her to speak up, which is a slight drawback. That's why she's been placed under someone like me, a mid-level employee, to help her grow and build confidence through experience. One day, a few days before a meeting with our major client, Morgan Manufacturing, Emma came to me for advice. I can't help but worry if someone as young as I am should be handling such an important client. I think someone with more experience, like you, John, should be in charge. While not a household name, Morgan Manufacturing is well known in our industry. I understood Emma's apprehension. But, personally, I thought it was time for her to start handling larger clients. Don't worry, I'll be there to support you if anything comes up. You tend to underestimate yourself. But you were given this responsibility because you're capable, so have some confidence. If you say so, John, I'll give it my best. Could you look over the materials with me? With a timid smile, Emma looked up at me as she spoke. I nodded with a smile in return and began reviewing the documents Emma had brought. On the day of the meeting, Emma, accompanied by her predecessor and colleague, Sam, headed to Morgan Manufacturing as planned. The client representative, Andrew, is known for his kind personality and courteous demeanor. With Andrew as her counterpart, I felt confident that Emma would be able to perform without being too nervous. Thinking that, I turned back to my usual tasks at my desk. But as I glanced at the first document, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me. I messed up. Emma. What happened? Did you forget something?" Standing in front of my desk with a forlorn expression was Emma, who should have been at the client meeting. I instinctively checked the time, noticing it was only moments after the meeting was scheduled to start. As I looked on, puzzled and worried, wondering if she had forgotten something or felt unwell, Emma simply bit her lip, her face clouded with regret. Realizing the heavy atmosphere, I braced myself, knowing an unexpected situation had clearly arisen. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emma looked at me with a lost, almost helpless expression. After hesitating, she finally spoke, her voice slow and uncertain. "Actually, I was kicked out just 3 minutes after the meeting started. They said I was out of place because I was incompetent." "What did you just say?" I couldn't hold back my shock, my voice rising at such a staggering statement. As I listened to the details of the exchange with the client, I could feel my face growing red with anger. When she finished, I took several deep breaths, trying to calm my boiling rage. Yet, the fury of having my subordinate insulted without even being given a chance to speak still pulsed through me like a raging river of magma. It was my fault, please, John, it's fine." "No way. Emma, you did nothing wrong." I nodded to reassure her, but she only grew paler, her frightened gaze fixed on me. "But, your face." Wondering what she meant, I took a sip of coffee, and then I realized it. Reflected on the surface of the coffee was my face, teeth clenched and eyes wide with fury, looking like some kind of demon. I turned away from Emma and took a few deep breaths. As her manager, I knew acting out of anger wouldn't do any good. By the time I lifted my coffee cup again, my reflection had returned to its usual calm expression. After finishing my coffee, I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed a certain number. After a few rings, I heard the faint click of the call connecting. "Hello, thank you for taking the call. I'll get straight to the point. We're canceling the $70 million contract." Without waiting for a response, I hung up. Then, feeling calm, I made my way leisurely to the break room for another coffee. Suddenly, I heard Emma jogging to catch up behind me. "John, what was that call about? Did you say $70 million? Who were you talking to?" "Oh, I called Mr. Morgan, the president of Morgan Manufacturing. I decided we can't trust him with a $70 million contract anymore." Hearing this, Emma went pale, her breath catching. It was understandable. Morgan Manufacturing is one of our largest clients. Canceling a deal that big must seem unimaginable to her. Seeing the worry and confusion spreading across her face, I realized she wouldn't be able to focus on work without a full explanation. So, I reluctantly began explaining everything. After I shared a bit about my position, Emma's eyes widened even more. She covered her mouth with her hands, as though suppressing a scream. I couldn't blame her. It was a lot to take in. But her curiosity soon replaced the earlier fear and guilt, her eyes bright with interest. It seemed she'd stopped blaming herself, which was a relief. I relaxed as I recalled the incident she had described. Emma said everything started off smoothly, with friendly greetings as planned. Her predecessor, Sam, introduced her to the client representative, Andrew. True to his reputation, Andrew was a polite man who made an effort to put Emma at ease, helping her to relax for the meeting. This deal is truly exciting. Our president, Mr. Morgan, is very enthusiastic about it and looks forward to further discussions with you, Emma. We're equally honored to have this connection with your company and look forward to working together. Emma and Sam both bowed deeply. Just as they were about to begin the main discussion, the conference room door suddenly swung open. As Emma and the others turned their surprised gazes toward it, they saw a man in his 40s standing there, arms crossed and wearing a smug, unpleasant grin. Without knocking, the man barged into the room, leaving Emma confused. Sam and Andrew looked equally stunned. Is something the matter, Thomas? What's with the rookie? The man called Thomas ignored the question and instead began scrutinizing Emma from head to toe. Judging by the manager title on his badge and the way Andrew responded to him, it was clear Thomas was in a higher position. As Emma stood there, shocked that someone with such a rude attitude could be a manager, Thomas started speaking unilaterally. I heard today's meeting was with some tiny local factory. How short-staffed must they be? Sending a rookie like her to handle a company of our scale, are they mocking us? No, actually, these representatives are. Andrew tried to explain, but Thomas waved his hand dismissively, silencing him, then plopped into the chair across from Emma. Without hesitation, he grabbed the materials Emma had prepared and began flipping through them with a look of disdain. Emma and Sam exchanged glances. Our company is no small local factory but a reputable industrial firm, hardly deserving of such a label. Even if we were a small operation, there was no reason to be looked down upon. After all, whether big or small, companies in manufacturing share the same commitment to craftsmanship. Small factories can tackle projects that big corporations might not manage, so there's no reason for either to act superior. Feeling an undercurrent of discomfort, Emma thought it best to resolve the situation calmly. She assumed there had been some misunderstanding and began, "Excuse me," but before she could finish, the real trouble began. How could anyone expect a real deal with some local factory girl? Incompetence are out of place here. As he finished saying this, the sharp sound of tearing paper filled the room. To her shock, Thomas has ripped up the materials and business card Emma had prepared. In the silence that followed, fragments of the torn contract floated to the floor, scattered in shreds across the carpet. Andrew stared in disbelief, his mouth hanging open, while he glanced between Thomas and the shredded papers. Emma and Sam were equally shaken, their gaze fixed on Thomas, who seemed oblivious to the shock around him, instead crossing his arms with a smug expression. He then looked at Emma with a self-satisfied smirk as she stood there, pale and paralyzed. Thomas, these aren't the people you think. The meeting with the local factory is tomorrow. These representatives are from Clean Industries. What? Clean Industries? You mean that well-known manufacturing company? At the mention of the company's name, Thomas stiffened, his face twisting with embarrassment. But he quickly regained his arrogant posture, pointing his chin dismissively toward Emma. In that case, it's even more insulting. Surely there were better people they could have sent. Sending someone this young is an insult. With that, he practically shoved Emma out of the conference room, abruptly ending the meeting. Barging into a meeting uninvited and mistaking us for a different client is just unacceptable. Furthermore, dismissing Emma solely because of her youth and gender, assuming she's not worth speaking to, is simply out of line. Thomas would certainly face consequences for this behavior. With that thought in mind, I took a sip of my freshly brewed coffee. The situation shifted within just an hour. I was informed that 2 representatives from Morgan Manufacturing had arrived, and I stood up, anticipating their visit. Summoning Emma, we slowly made our way to the reception room, where Mr. Morgan, the president of Morgan Manufacturing, was waiting with a pale face. A man in his 40s standing next to him, with a disgruntled, sulky expression, reluctantly bows his head to me. This man is probably Thomas. Despite reaching a managerial position in his 40s, a sign of considerable ability, there was no sense of vigor in Thomas's demeanor. In fact, his entire attitude exuded irritation, as if he couldn't fathom why he should apologize. But Mr. Morgan ignored Thomas's behavior entirely, bowing repeatedly as soon as he saw me. I deeply apologize for my subordinate's rudeness today. We are sincerely sorry. Please, raise your head. With him bowing so persistently, I couldn't get a word in, so I urged him repeatedly to lift his head. But he wouldn't listen, saying, "I cannot possibly raise my head. I must apologize for our mismanagement." Thomas appeared thoroughly confused by the sight of his company's president apologizing so fervently, his brow furrowing in bewilderment. As much as you say that, isn't your apology misdirected? With this misunderstanding still unaddressed, we're getting nowhere. At my firm response, Mr. Morgan, now pale, finally raised his head. Looking at me with a nervous expression, he awaited my next words. To confirm, the reason for your visit today is due to the incident earlier, correct? As I asked this, Thomas's eyebrow twitched. Ignoring the simmering glare he directed at me, I continued speaking. So, you're Thomas. Have you explained what happened earlier to Mr. Morgan? At my question, Thomas scowled, clearly annoyed, and instead shot back with a question of his own. Who exactly are you anyway? I'm being dragged here by Mr. Morgan, and it's honestly a bit inconvenient. Thomas. Just what do you think you're saying? Mr. Morgan immediately started to reprimand Thomas, visibly flustered. But Thomas only pouted and continued to glare at me. I'll explain who I am later. For now, can you answer my question? When I pressed him again, Thomas reluctantly began to speak. Well, I already told Mr. Morgan it was just a small misunderstanding on my part. Honestly, it's your employee who left abruptly. If anything, I'd like to know what happened on your end. Scratching his head, Thomas muttered under his breath, "What a hassle." It was clear he was trying to dodge responsibility for his actions, perhaps thinking he could get away with it. Though his attitude infuriated me, I held my temper and continued. Then allow me to go over the details myself. With that, I recounted the events as Emma had described them, this time in front of Mr. Morgan. Just as planned, we were having our meeting when Thomas suddenly barged in. Without so much as a proper greeting, he tore up the materials and business card Emma had prepared. I described how he mistook our company for a small-town factory and repeatedly made derogatory remarks about such companies. As I went on, Mr. Morgan's face flushed with anger. Yet even after hearing all this, Thomas remained unperturbed, casually remarking, "Oh, that's all?" Really, followed by a small click of his tongue. It was simply a bit of a misunderstanding, a difference in perspective, if you will. I reviewed the materials. And because they were prepared by a young employee with only a few years of experience, they were, honestly, quite lacking. He glanced at Emma, a condescending smile spreading across his face. So I pointed that out and, doing her a favor, I tore them up so she could redo them from scratch. But she ran off crying. Really? It seems she's a bit immature as a professional. Even now, Thomas was twisting the story to suit his narrative. At this point, I was beyond anger, feeling more disbelief at his refusal to admit his wrongdoing. But this was no time to let up on holding him accountable. So, that's your version of events, is it? It's not a version, it's the truth. Clearly, that employee over there just spun her story to suit herself. Thomas looked around the room with a smug grin. I kept my gaze fixed on Thomas, who maintained a smug, confident demeanor, assuming there was no evidence. Without looking away, I called out to Emma. Emma, let's clarify exactly what happened. Could you bring that out? Emma nodded quietly and placed a voice recorder on the table. Thomas looked shocked at the unexpected appearance of a voice recorder, exclaiming, "What? What is that? Don't tell me you were recording this meeting. That's a violation of privacy." You might not have known, Thomas, since you joined midway through the meeting, but recording was pre-approved. I replied calmly, and Thomas finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation, clenching his teeth in frustration. If what you said matched Emma's account, we wouldn't have needed to bring this out. But it seems your story doesn't quite line up with the report I received. Surely there's no need to actually listen to it. Sweating visibly, Thomas stammered a weak protest. But I pressed the play button on the recorder without hesitation. I thought it best for Mr. Morgan to hear the content as well, for clarity. Thomas's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form words, utterly speechless. Meanwhile, the voice recorder began to faithfully replay the earlier exchange. In just those brief 3 minutes, a stream of insults from Thomas played back, leaving Mr. Morgan visibly trembling with anger. Too furious to even speak. Although Emma had given me a summary, hearing the sound of the contract being torn filled me with a fresh surge of anger. Thomas, seeing Mr. Morgan's reaction, finally dropped his head in defeat. With the recorded evidence out, he must have realized he couldn't lie his way out. I deeply apologize for my conduct. But as you can hear in the recording, it was just an honest mistake. A mistake, you say? Thomas gave a forced smile, trying to gauge my reaction. It was just a minor communication error. I mixed up this company with a small-town factory scheduled for the next day. The once confident Thomas, who had been so condescending earlier, now looked back and forth between Mr. Morgan and me, bowing repeatedly. His tone entirely submissive. Thomas's overly submissive performance was almost comical, and I found myself shaking my head. Thomas, you may say that, but it was a mistake isn't enough to justify what we've endured. I said I'm sorry. His apology was cut off by my unyielding smile, and frustration quickly crept across his face. Even after I apologized, you're still pushing this. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? Thomas. Ignoring Mr. Morgan's near-desperate reprimand, Thomas's attitude only grew more obstinate. Mr. Morgan, this is what happens when you keep apologizing. They take advantage. Cancel a $70 million contract? Who gives some employee like him that kind of authority? Because I have full authority over that contract, granted by my father, President Kingston. At this revelation, Thomas's mouth fell open, his eyes wide with surprise. It was clear he hadn't considered that I might be more than just a regular employee. What? Neither your representatives nor that woman said anything about that. If I'd known, I wouldn't have acted like that. I swear. Of course, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want special treatment just because I'm the president's son. Thomas's strength seemed to abandon him, and he collapsed onto the sofa, mumbling feebly. Please. I truly didn't know. I'll never act that way again, so just this once." He mutters those words almost like a delirious rambling. Ignoring the shocked Thomas, I turn my gaze toward Emma. With a determined expression, she gives me a deep nod and steps forward. Our distrust of Thomas stems not only from how he treated me but from his entire attitude. Thinking it's acceptable to treat our company with respect simply because of our status, while dismissing a smaller company, is a serious problem in itself. Emma's words perfectly echoed my own feelings. Emma had always been modest and lacked confidence in herself. But now, she was boldly expressing her opinions to Thomas. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but she finished her statement unwaveringly. I nod to Emma a few times, conveying my appreciation for her hard work. Then, standing directly in front of Thomas, I looked down at him intently. Realizing the gravity of his actions, he turned pale, his knees trembling. "So, we will proceed with canceling the $70 million contract." "No." My words seemed to crush Thomas, his expression that of a man facing judgment. Beside him, Mr. Morgan held his head in his hands, glaring at Thomas. Finally, Mr. Morgan spoke, his voice sharp with anger. "I've covered for you countless times, but enough is enough." Mr. Morgan's usual calm demeanor had vanished, his fury unmistakable. Just seeing this made it easy to imagine how much trouble Thomas had caused over the years. Every employee here understands the extent to which our company owes Clean Industries and, by extension, Mr. Kingston. "I don't know or care about that. You're all making such a big deal over torn documents. Can't you just print new copies?" Cornered, Thomas now turned his frustration toward us. "Yes, I may have behaved poorly earlier, and for that, I apologize. I'm sorry, all right? I assure you, I've learned my lesson." Though he used the words of an apology, his tone was petulant, as if he were a teenager. He exaggeratedly bowed, then looked back at Emma and me with a smug, self-satisfied grin. His arrogance left no doubt that he wasn't truly sorry. "I have no interest in accepting such a shallow apology." "John is absolutely right," Mr. Morgan agreed. "Putting Thomas in a position of responsibility simply because he's related to the founder was a mistake." Almost as if he couldn't stand to look at him anymore, Mr. Morgan covered his face with his hands. It was clear Thomas had been brought in through a connection that Mr. Morgan couldn't refuse. While nepotism alone isn't always wrong, a person like Thomas shouldn't be leading anyone. Mr. Morgan turned back to us, bowing deeply once again. "I truly apologize for everything that's happened. Rest assured, Thomas will face appropriate disciplinary action." Next to Mr. Morgan, who was repeatedly apologizing, Thomas stood with his eyes wide open in shock. Having always used his family ties to his advantage, it was clear he'd never considered that he might one day face real consequences for his actions. Thomas sat there, eyes blinking rapidly, utterly speechless. Meanwhile, Mr. Morgan bowed deeply once again, his expression strained. "On top of everything, it may be selfish of me to ask, but could you reconsider the contract? Please, just one more chance for our company." His earnest apology made my heart ache. I held no ill feelings toward Mr. Morgan personally. In fact, his dedication to treating his employees with respect and warmth, almost like family, was close to the ideal of what I thought a leader should be. That was why I had proposed the $70 million contract with Morgan Manufacturing. Their work and reputation were impeccable. The problem lay solely with Thomas. And Thomas, oblivious to the gravity of his actions, simply muttered to himself, "A punishment? Me? Why should I be the one to suffer here?" Seeing his self-centered behavior, I couldn't help but sigh. Mr. Morgan has been sincerely apologizing for the situation, but you, Thomas, are the root cause here. Huh? Well, Thomas flinched, looking up at me with a fearful expression. His concern was solely for his own status and security, and with a calm but firm tone, I continued. Thomas, do you only apologize when forced? I have no interest in maintaining any relationship with a company that employs someone like that. Beside me, Emma nodded repeatedly. As a dedicated and hard-working individual, she couldn't stand someone like Thomas, who had recklessly interfered with her work and nearly ruined a significant contract. Seeing even the young Emma looking at Thomas with such disdain seemed to solidify Mr. Morgan's decision. After a brief, pained expression crossed his face, he shook his head as if clearing his mind. Then, with a firm voice, he spoke to Thomas. Your actions have severely damaged our company's reputation. Be prepared to take full responsibility for this. What? A punishment? You mean a demotion? Or, I won't be fired, will I? Finally grasping the severity of the situation, Thomas's face paled with worry. It was clear that until now, Mr. Morgan or other influential people had managed to smooth things over whenever he caused problems. But now, seeing the severity in Mr. Morgan's face, he seemed to grasp the reality. For the first time, Thomas abandoned his arrogant demeanor and dropped to the floor in a deep bow. Only now, under threat, did he finally choose to apologize. I sincerely apologize. I truly regret my actions. His tone sounded genuine for once, but it only filled me with disappointment. Why hadn't he shown this remorse from the beginning? No, if he were the type to apologize, he wouldn't have shown such rude behavior in the first place. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and steadied myself. Then, calm and collected, I delivered my final decision to Mr. Morgan and Thomas. I hear your apology, but it doesn't change the fact that Emma was dismissed from the meeting partway through. I can't, in good conscience, continue this partnership as things stand. Immediately, both Mr. Morgan and Thomas slumped in defeat, looking more like they had collapsed onto the floor than bowed. Addressing them, I continued with a gentle but resolute tone. Regardless, I'll inform my father of everything that's happened here. Please await his response. No, please. I beg you, don't cancel the contract. If word gets out that I cost the company $70 million, I'll be fired. Together with Emma, who had been quietly observing the situation, I leave the meeting room. Up until the moment the door closed, Thomas's pitiful shouts echoed through the quiet office. Afterward, I took Emma with me to personally report the situation to my father. Though initially nervous about meeting him, she soon launched into a clear and confident explanation, outlining everything that had transpired. It was obvious that this experience had instilled in her a sense of responsibility and perspective on professional relationships. Emma's rapid growth was perhaps the only positive outcome from this ordeal. After that, my father arranged a discussion with Mr. Morgan, and they decided to move forward with a conditional contract. The agreed-upon condition was that no more misguided employees like Thomas would ever be assigned as representatives in the future. Though I thought it was a rather lenient resolution, Mr. Morgan chose to go a step further. He terminated Thomas on the spot. It seemed that, following the incident, investigations uncovered a long history of Thomas's misconduct. Mr. Morgan had only been aware of a fraction of the problems. It turned out Thomas had driven talented young employees to quit and offended clients with unprofessional behavior, leading to lost contracts. It's clear now that some of our struggles were directly tied to Thomas's actions. He even drove away some of our most promising talent and damaged our standing with valuable clients. After a long time, I met with Mr. Morgan, who let out a tired sigh before bowing his head to me. Because of everything, I caused you a lot of trouble this time, John. Despite that, you still went through with the $70 million contract. And I truly can't thank you enough. If our company were to withdraw, Morgan Manufacturing would likely face significant losses at best. In the worst-case scenario, they could have even faced the threat of bankruptcy. It was clear they would be even more reliant on us moving forward. But I shook my head slowly and extended my hand to Mr. Morgan. We all need support at some point. I have deep respect for you, Mr. Morgan. You never stopped putting your employees first. Thank you, John, truly, thank you. With tears in his eyes, Mr. Morgan, who was old enough to be my father, clutched my hand. He had made the mistake of supporting someone like Thomas. But everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do once you realize them. We shook hands firmly, committing ourselves to the success of our future dealings. As for Thomas, life was rough for him after his dismissal. Due to his poor character, he had been shuffled around related companies before, but this time he was completely cut off. Even his family disowned him, severing all ties. For years, he had relied on others to clean up his messes, but with no support left, he scrambled to find a new job only to be rejected everywhere. By then, he had never actually put in honest work and had developed a reputation for his attitude and behavior. He burned through his savings in no time, put his house up as collateral, and eventually disappeared. The last I heard, there were rumors he was seen scavenging in trash bins in a rundown neighborhood, but there's been no word of him since. As for me, I continued my work without interruption. I was wrapping up a rotation through various departments in preparation for becoming the next president, with my current role in sales being my final stop. Starting next year, I was told I'd be working closer to my father as vice president. One day, I called Emma into my office. I need a capable and trustworthy assistant by my side. How about it? Would you work with me? Yes. I will do everything in my power to support you. Emma firmly nods at my proposal. Dawn is the hesitant young employee who once wavered in the face of responsibility. With her talent, combined with a newfound confidence, she'll be unstoppable. I'm certain she'll become a vital asset to our company's future. With that hope in my heart, I stepped into the office once more. Supporting each other not only in the workplace but also in life was still a few years away for Emma and me.